So I work at the University of Toronto in the Department of Civil and Mineral Engineering, and I manage a research group that specializes in green infrastructure and low impact development. Our group works to understand the root causes of urban flooding and advance stormwater technologies that can mitigate flooding and improve the livability of our cities. I also serve on the board of directors for the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. So I've been doing research or conducting research related to stormwater management for almost 10 years. So our research group specializes in the green infrastructure area. So we have active projects related to green roofs, bioretention, permeable pavements. A lot of our work focuses around performance evaluation and operations of maintenance of these technologies, and basically trying to improve their feasibility and performance specifically for the Ontario climate. So urban flooding is a very challenging issue because it has multiple causes. So it's a result of the urbanization process. It's due to population growth and densification, legacy infrastructure, as well as unmaintained or poorly maintained infrastructure, and then climate change. So I think one of the hurdles that we as a society struggle the most with is finding infrastructure solutions that mitigate urban flooding but are also feasible and affordable to operate over the long term. My PhD research was the first field study of these different permeable pavement products in Canada at a full scale. And we had applied it in an area of Vaughan that has very low permeability soil, so there's a lot of clay and silt. So one of the things that we were looking at is how much stormwater you could infiltrate under these non-ideal conditions, but that are actually quite common throughout Ontario. What we saw from the multiple years of monitoring work that we did, we were able to reduce the volume, the total amount of water that was going to go to a downstream surface water system by 40%. So even though the soils have low infiltration rates, they actually can absorb and infiltrate a large quantity of rainwater. Additionally, we could reduce the rate, the peak flow, how quickly the water is leaving that system by 80 or 90%. And that has huge implications for preventing flooding, because flooding is an issue of too much at the same time. So if you slow it down, even if it's still going downstream, you're not going to overwhelm your infrastructure. And then finally, we also looked at the quality of the water, and we saw really significant improvements in the water. The pavements act as a passive filter, so they capture a lot of the suspended sediment material that's in urban runoff. So we reduce the amount of suspended sediments, and then heavy metals and even nutrients that are associated with those pollutants. And they accumulate gradually over time in the pavement itself. And then we can go in and do maintenance and remove them and dispose of them later. Yeah, I think the industrial involvement in particular speaks to the fact that this is an area of potential growth, market growth for a lot of suppliers. This is a new product that provides benefits and services that are unique, and there's an opportunity for growth there. It also, permeable pavement in particular, gives some sustainability component to a product that actually has a lot of negative environmental impacts. There's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, for example, that go into the sediment or the cement manufacturing process. There's really not a great approach yet or to mitigate that, but there's some trade-offs that we could maybe achieve here. Even though we are having an impact in the environment in this way, we're now actually also having a positive impact in another system that also needs attention. And then when it comes to the government partners, I think the interest is often driven by the fact that we are going to have continued growth. Our cities, we want our cities to grow, we need our cities to grow. And so what we need to do is trying to come up with innovative ways to support this growth while simultaneously reducing our impact on our natural resources. So the GRIT Lab is an interdisciplinary lab. It brings together researchers from sciences, engineering, and landscape architecture. And it was created in response to the Toronto City Green Roof Bylaw, trying to support that bylaw and then the emerging industry with sound science that provides recommendations for design, again, focused on the Toronto climate. So some of the things that we've looked at in the past have included the role irrigation has in terms of both the resilience of the green roofs as well as their stormwater management benefits, plant selection, soil selection, and even demonstrating the integration of green roofs with photovoltaic systems into the same roof space. So we've got to do some really interesting things, and we share that back with the city to help inform their best practices and recommendations. Over the next year, we have new lab facilities that are actually under construction right now, and we're going to be starting research looking at the use of biochar as an amendment to improve both plant health and stormwater management. Also looking at capturing the irrigation water that we apply in the summer during periods of drought and reusing that because some of it does leave the green roof system, so capturing it and then recycling it as irrigation water to reduce the amount of potable water that these green roofs are consuming. So it's going to be pretty exciting once those two studies start next year. Yeah, so one of the reasons bioretention systems are so popular, particularly with municipalities, is they fit very easily into the road right of way, and they provide multifunctional space. So out of all of the LEDs, they're one of the most visible ones, and so they can be integrated into public space and making the space more livable for the public. And they're also relatively simple to maintain, because if you're going to have a garden anyways, you might as well have a garden that's going to give you some stormwater functionality. So some of the things that we've seen in our research is there's a lot of variability right now in terms of how these systems are being designed, because it's an emerging technology, and there needs to be more consideration about operation and consideration in the initial design process. We often will find sites are not performing to expected levels of service because things like details like inlets are too small and they become cluttered with just general debris and litter, or that the placement of, say, street catch basins and inlets are not well thought out, and so you'll have a catch basin in front of an inlet, so the road runoff ends up going down there instead of into the garden. So that's been something that we've definitely observed when we've looked at these more long-term processes. The good news is that there's actually standards, Canadian standards that are almost finished. They are actually already available for public consultation for bioretentions. So I think that that's going to really help the industry grow and improve long-term performance for this technology. I think there's a lot of education needed, particularly for homeowners and business owners. And this education needs to be customized to the local community because there's a huge variability in our infrastructure. You could be in a neighborhood that has a combined sewer or partially separated sewers or fully separated sewers, or the age or the density. All that's going to have an influence on the risks that you experience for flooding and what measures are going to be best suited to mitigate flooding. And so I think more education and awareness is needed to the public, and also just basic literacy about where your stormwater goes. A lot of people are often shocked when they find out that your stormwater doesn't actually go to the wastewater plant and it doesn't receive much significant treatment before returning to a creek or stream. And just that basic level of literacy and awareness would certainly help with then getting homeowners to think about what they can do to protect their property and also protect their neighborhood green infrastructure. So I would emphasize the value of backwater flow valves. That, I think, more than anything, is something that you can put into. A lot of the damage often comes from infrastructure backing up and then things being destroyed because it's stormwater mixed with something else. So that can certainly help with that. I think for renters, especially when you're a basement renter, having apartment insurance is also something that really can help protect you, because if that's your living space and you're flooded, it becomes a really big issue. And then downspout disconnections are the other really simple thing that a lot of neighborhoods, not all neighborhoods, but many neighborhoods have. And implementing that properly can also help reduce the risk of overflow in your neighborhood. In my opinion, rain gardens or bioretention cells are the simplest technology to implement at the home level. It allows you to have a nice landscaped area, as well as provides space for detaining water, infiltrating water, filtering water. They're easier to maintain, I think, in the long run, because it's maintenance that a homeowner is already familiar with, like gardening, than, say, a permeable pavement, which is a new product that's going to require different considerations and more changes in just day-to-day practice. The major challenge, I think, is at the municipal level, and putting in policies and funding in place so that it is clear in terms of who is responsible for the infrastructure's upkeep and maintenance. I think that's been the area that municipalities have struggled the most with, because the department that does the design is not related to the department that does the operations and maintenance. And it's transferring also our infrastructure, where in the past it would have been centralized in a single location and now distributing it. And so that means we need to think at an institution level, a different way of doing stuff. It's good for the Canadian economy because it creates a lot of local jobs. And then following that, though, it's also developing the revenue mechanisms so that a municipality has a means to support the ongoing investment that's needed to keep this infrastructure functioning well. And I think that's why you see municipalities either adopting or seriously considering stormwater utility charges as a source of ensuring that this infrastructure is sustainable and feasible over the long term. I think that's a difficult one. There certainly is a lot of innovation. It is on the market, but I'd say like CB Shield is a great Canadian company. An example, they've developed an insert that would go in a catch basin to improve the amount of sediment that could be collected. And they've also now started expanding to developing sort of like inlets for stormwater management ponds that are going to be simpler to maintain than a traditional forebay. So there are really good examples like that. Down in the US, there's also some neat, again, like just pick off the shelf products that would standardize, say, inlet design for bioretentions and concentrate the accumulation of materials so that it's easier to clean for staff. But I think the real area of growth, specifically in the Canadian context, is the upscaling of LID from the pilot and lot level to neighborhood level designs and the development of tools and software to facilitate like efficient and optimized design of treatment train products. I think we're going to see a lot of growth in that area in the coming years. I have not dealt with a flood in a home. I live in a condo. However, I live in Liberty Village. So my building was very lucky, but a number of buildings in my neighborhood had very severe flooding just this past month in August. So it's always interesting when it happens as someone who's a researcher, because it's like a case study for class. Yeah, so it was very close to home, and same with some of the extreme damage that happened to the streetcars. That's my that's my trip to work. So yeah, I'd say I was affected personally. Yeah, I think in the context of the condo thing, what you really realize in terms of the issue of flooding is it often is tied to also power shortages. So the role of having backup generators is an essential piece of infrastructure for safety, so that you can keep elevators operational during periods of outage. And you don't think about it until suddenly you're on the 20th floor of myself and you have a 2-year-old and a second one on the way. So that's very important. And I think what we saw too also in August is that there may need to be some additional, like, remembering that water is traveling from your roof down to grate. And that system, that infrastructure system needs to be designed well, inspected, and considerations for this extreme when it's overflowed, so that you can avoid the situation where it's people's cars and their storage lockers, basically their garages and their basements, getting destroyed. I myself don't, and I think because you are fortunate in a condo environment to not be so directly, but one of the things that I have experienced serving at TRCA's board is I have heard, residents who have been affected by some of the severe flooding around the Black Creek, and that experience, it's traumatizing. And you really can hear, when people come to our board meetings to talk about some of the experiences and decisions that are being made in their neighborhood now, the fear tied to that experience, it takes years to recover, and you can hear it verbally often when residents are talking about just how traumatizing these events can be for residents, because at the end of the day, it's dangerous. It's very dangerous, and can cost your home, your livelihood, and in worst case, like even your life. So it certainly is something that when it does happen to you, it stays with you for the rest of your life often. I think with the subject of flooding, it's really, at the end of the day, all about resilience, because we cannot eliminate the risk for the entire range of weather conditions that are possible. And in the reality of a changing climate that we have, it's even more difficult to really predict what is going to be a common storm in the future. And so I think where homeowners, they need to focus on preparedness and resilience. So what is most essential? How do you protect that's most important to you, so that if you're unlucky enough to have to go through something like this, you can get your life back as quickly as possible with the least trauma as possible. And I think that's really the message that I think stormwater professionals need to communicate to clients.